In 1953, a psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron received a phone call that would transform him into one of history's most dangerous minds. The voice on the other end belonged to someone from the Central Intelligence Agency, and they had a proposition that would make Cameron wealthy beyond imagination. All he had to do was answer one question: how do you completely erase a human mind and rebuild it from scratch? What Cameron didn't know was that he was about to become the architect of the most horrifying psychological experiments ever conducted on unwitting human subjects. Experiments so brutal, so systematic, that they would rewrite the very foundations of mental manipulation. The patients who entered his hospital as ordinary people seeking help would emerge as hollow shells, their memories wiped, their personalities destroyed, their very sense of self obliterated. This is the story of MK-Ultra, the CIA's mind control program that turned respected doctors into torturers and innocent patients into test subjects for psychological warfare. A story that proves the most terrifying monsters aren't born in laboratories. They're created in the sterile halls of institutions we trust. What you're about to learn will change how you see every authority figure, every expert, every voice that claims to know what's best for you. Because once you understand how easily the human mind can be broken, you'll never trust the same way again. The children arrived at the institute on school buses, their parents believing they were sending them to summer camp programs designed to help with behavioral problems. What those parents didn't know was that their children had been selected for something far more sinister: experiments to determine how young minds could be programmed before they developed the psychological defenses of adulthood. Dr. Cameron had theorized that children's brains still form it. Neural pathways would be ideal subjects for complete personality restructuring. The youngest subjects were barely 6 years old, brought to Allen Memorial under the pretense of treating childhood disorders that had been deliberately misdiagnosed by CIA-affiliated psychiatrists. These children were separated from their families for months at a time, told that their parents had abandoned them, that they were unwanted and unloved. The psychological isolation was carefully calculated to break down their existing attachments and make them desperate for approval from their captors. Cameron's researchers discovered that children subjected to this treatment would cling to any adult who showed them kindness, making them perfect candidates for behavioral modification. The techniques used on these young minds were adapted from studies of prisoner-of-war conditioning, designed to create subjects who would follow orders without question, who would betray anyone for the approval of their handlers. Years later, when investigators finally uncovered these programs, they found that many of the child subjects had been permanently damaged, their ability to form normal relationships destroyed, their personalities fractured beyond repair. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb understood something that most people refuse to accept. Human beings are nothing more than biological machines waiting for the right programmer to take control. His laboratory at the CIA's Technical Services Division had become a workshop for redesigning human consciousness, where the latest advances in chemistry and psychology were weaponized against the most fundamental aspects of human nature. Gottlieb's team had identified the key vulnerabilities in human psychology: the need for social acceptance, the fear of isolation, the desperate desire to make sense of confusing experiences. By systematically attacking these psychological pressure points, they could reduce any person to a state of complete dependency and suggestibility. The process began with sensory deprivation. Subjects were placed in soundproof chambers, their vision blocked, their sense of touch eliminated through special restraints that prevented them from feeling their own bodies. Within hours, most people began hallucinating. Within days, they would agree to anything their captors suggested just to make the isolation end. But Gottlieb's innovations went far beyond simple sensory deprivation. His team developed drug combinations that could selectively target different aspects of consciousness, compounds that would erase specific memories while leaving others intact, substances that would make subjects completely suggestible while maintaining their ability to function normally in most situations. The goal wasn't just to control behavior, it was to reprogram the fundamental structure of human thought itself. The selection process for MK-Ultra subjects revealed the true scope of the program's ambitions. CIA recruiters didn't just target foreign enemies or captured spies, they systematically identified vulnerable populations within American society itself. Psychiatric hospitals provided a steady supply of subjects whose disappearances wouldn't be questioned. Prisons offered inmates who could be promised reduced sentences in exchange for participation. Universities recruited students with offers of easy money for psychological research that was described in deliberately vague terms. But the most disturbing aspect of the selection process was how it targeted society's most powerless members. Racial minorities, the poor, the mentally ill, and children from broken homes were specifically chosen because their complaints would be dismissed, their suffering ignored by authorities. CIA psychologists had conducted detailed studies of social hierarchies, identifying exactly which groups of people society would be willing to sacrifice for the greater good. The program's administrators understood that successful mind control required experienced and able test subjects, people whose destruction wouldn't create political problems for the agency. Internal documents revealed the cold calculation behind these choices. Subjects were selected not just for their psychological vulnerability, but for their social invisibility. The perfect test subject was someone whose complete personality destruction would never be investigated, never be mourned, never be acknowledged by the broader society that had abandoned them to these experiments. Allen Memorial Institute became a factory for psychological destruction, processing hundreds of subjects through Cameron's systematic program of mental annihilation. The facility's basement levels, hidden from visitors and most staff members, housed the specialized equipment necessary for complete personality restructuring. Subjects were strapped to tables and subjected to electroshock treatments that were precisely calibrated to cause maximum psychological damage without killing the patient. The electrical current was applied not just to induce seizures but to systematically destroy specific brain functions while leaving others intact. Cameron had discovered that by targeting particular regions of the brain with different intensities of electrical shock, he could selectively erase memories, eliminate personality traits, and reduce complex human beings to blank slates ready for reprogramming. The patients who survived these procedures often emerged unable to recognize their own children, incapable of remembering their names, stripped of every connection to their former lives. But this wasn't collateral damage, this was the intended result. Cameron's detailed notes reveal his excitement at achieving what he called complete depatterning, the total erasure of an individual's psychological identity. He had solved the puzzle that had frustrated mind control researchers for decades: how to destroy a human personality so completely that nothing remained of the original person. The drug trials at Allen Memorial pushed the boundaries of human experimentation beyond anything previously attempted in medical history. Patients were given massive doses of LSD, sometimes for weeks at a time, while researchers carefully documented the breakdown of their psychological defenses. But LSD was just the beginning. Cameron's team had access to experimental compounds that had never been tested on humans, substances so powerful they could alter brain chemistry permanently. Subjects were injected with combinations of hallucinogens, paralytic agents, and experimental psychiatric drugs in dosages that would have killed laboratory animals. The goal wasn't therapeutic, it was to discover exactly how far the human mind could be pushed before it snapped completely. One patient, a housewife who had entered the hospital for mild depression, was kept in a drug-induced coma for 65 consecutive days while recordings played continuously in her ears. When she finally awakened, she had lost the ability to speak, couldn't control her bodily functions, and showed no recognition of her husband or children. Cameron noted in her file that the experiment had been completely successful because her original personality had been entirely eliminated. The woman spent the rest of her life in institutional care, a living testament to the thoroughness of Cameron's techniques. Her family was told she had suffered a rare psychiatric breakdown, never learning that their wife and mother had been deliberately destroyed in the name of national security. The psychological techniques developed at Allen Memorial were so effective that they became the template for interrogation programs used by intelligence agencies worldwide. Cameron had discovered that the human need for social connection could be weaponized with devastating precision. Subjects were placed in complete isolation for months, denied all human contact except for brief sessions with traitors. Researchers who offered conditional approval based on compliance with specific demands. The isolation wasn't just physical, it was designed to attack the psychological foundations of human identity. Subjects were told that their families had abandoned them, that their friends had forgotten them, that they were worthless and unloved. After weeks of this treatment, most people would do anything for even the smallest gesture of human kindness. Cameron's team exploited this desperation by creating artificial relationships where approval and affection were conditional on accepting new beliefs and behaviors. Subjects learned to parrot back the ideas their captors wanted to hear, gradually internalizing these beliefs as their own thoughts. The process was so gradual, so subtle, that victims often never realized their minds had been systematically restructured. They emerged from treatment believing they had experienced genuine insights and personal growth, never understanding that their new personalities had been carefully crafted by their captors. This technique proved so effective that variations of it are still used in modern interrogation and cult indoctrination programs around the world. The scope of MK Ultra extended far beyond individual mind control experiments. It was designed to test techniques that could be deployed against entire populations. Gottlieb's team conducted field tests in major American cities, releasing aerosol versions of mind-altering drugs from rooftops and subway systems to study their effects on unsuspecting civilians. One operation in San Francisco involved spraying LSD into the air supply of an entire apartment building, then monitoring residents' behavior through hidden surveillance equipment. The results exceeded expectations. Within hours, people were exhibiting symptoms of severe psychological distress, hallucinating, losing their ability to think rationally. But the real breakthrough came when researchers realized they could achieve similar effects using much subtler methods. Television broadcasts embedded with specific frequency patterns could induce trance states in viewers. Radio programming could be designed to trigger particular emotional responses. Even something as simple as fluorescent lighting could be adjusted to create feelings of anxiety and helplessness in large groups of people. The implications were staggering. With the right combination of environmental factors, entire populations could be made more compliant, more suggestible, more willing to accept authority without question. Internal CIA documents from this period reveal plans for social management programs that would use these techniques to control public opinion, suppress dissent, and maintain social order through invisible psychological manipulation rather than obvious force. Dr. Louis Jolyon West emerged as one of MK Ultra's most innovative researchers, specializing in techniques that could be deployed without the subject's knowledge or consent. West's laboratory at UCLA became a testing ground for methods that could alter behavior through seemingly innocent interactions. His team developed conversation techniques that could implant false memories, trigger specific emotional responses, and gradually reshape a person's beliefs over time through carefully scripted encounters. West discovered that most people were far more suggestible than they realized. With the right approach, he could convince subjects to remember events that had never happened, to feel emotions that weren't based on their actual experiences, to make decisions they believed were their own, but had actually been programmed through subtle manipulation. The key was understanding how human memory actually worked. Not as a recording device that stored accurate information, but as a reconstruction system that could be influenced by suggestion, emotion, and social pressure. West's technique, UEs, were so sophisticated that subjects never suspected they were being manipulated. They would leave sessions believing they had simply had interesting conversations with a friendly researcher, never realizing that their memories had been altered, their beliefs modified, their future behavior programmed according to predetermined specifications. These techniques proved so effective that they became the foundation for modern advertising, political propaganda, and social engineering programs that continue to shape public opinion today. The success of MK Ultra's mind control techniques attracted attention from the highest levels of government and military leadership. President Eisenhower himself was briefed on the program's achievements, reportedly expressing amazement at demonstrations of subjects who had been completely reprogrammed to serve new masters. Military commanders saw immediate applications for creating perfect soldiers who would follow orders without hesitation, spies who could be programmed with false identities so complete that they would pass any interrogation, and saboteurs who could be activated years later without any conscious memory of their training. But the program's administrators had even grander visions. They saw the potential to reshape entire societies by systematically targeting key individuals in positions of influence. Political leaders, media figures, and cultural influencers could be subtly manipulated to promote specific agendas without realizing they were serving foreign interests. The techniques were so refined that the subjects would genuinely believe in the causes they were promoting, making their advocacy completely authentic and therefore maximally persuasive. Intelligence analysts calculated that by targeting just a few hundred key individuals in any society, they could effectively control the direction of entire nations. The beauty of this approach was its invisibility. There would be no coups, no obvious interventions, just a gradual shift in public opinion orchestrated by trusted leaders who had no idea they were following a script written by their enemies. Children proved to be the most valuable subjects in MKUltra's research program, not just because their minds were more malleable, but because they could be shaped into assets that would remain active for decades. Dr. Cameron's pediatric wing specialized in what he termed early intervention programming, taking children as young as 3 years old and systematically destroying their natural psychological development to replace it with artificial behavioral patterns. These children were told their parents were dead, that they had been rescued from terrible situations, that their new caretakers were the only family they would ever have. The psychological trauma of this deliberate abandonment made them desperate for approval and affection, which researchers provided only when the children demonstrated desired behaviors. Over months and years, these young subjects learned to suppress their natural emotions, their curiosity, their independent thinking in favor of mechanical compliance with authority figures. The program's success rate with children was nearly 100%. By adolescence, these subjects had become perfect intelligence assets who could be deployed into any situation requiring long-term infiltration. They would grow up to become teachers, politicians, journalists, and business leaders, carrying out missions they had been programmed to execute while remaining completely unaware of their true purpose. Some of these programmed children are still alive today, now elderly adults who spent their entire lives unknowingly serving the interests of their childhood programmers, never understanding why certain thoughts and behaviors felt so natural to them. The religious communities targeted by MKUltra researchers provided perfect laboratories for testing mass mind control techniques. Dr. West's team identified that deep-lie religious people were actually more susceptible to psychological manipulation because their existing beliefs in submission to higher authority could be redirected toward new targets. Entire congregations were subjected to experimental programs disguised as spiritual retreats or therapeutic religious experiences. Ministers and priests were recruited as unwitting accomplices, convinced they were participating in cutting-edge research to help their parishioners overcome psychological problems. During these sessions, congregation members were given drugs disguised as communion wine, subjected to hypnotic techniques presented as prayer and meditation, and exposed to carefully crafted messages designed to reshape their fundamental beliefs about reality. The researchers discovered that religious faith, rather than protecting people from manipulation, actually made them more vulnerable because they had already been conditioned to accept ideas without empirical evidence. Within weeks, entire communities could be reprogrammed to support political positions, social causes, or behavioral changes that directly contradicted their previous beliefs. The subjects never questioned these dramatic shifts because they experienced them as genuine spiritual revelations rather than external manipulation. This technique proved so effective that it became the model for modern cult recruitment and political radicalization programs that continue to reshape American society today. The university campus experiments revealed the terrifying ease with which young, educated minds could be systematically controlled through seemingly benign academic programs. Students at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, and dozens of other prestigious institutions were recruited for what they believed were legitimate psychology studies, never suspecting they were subjects in comprehensive mind control research. Dr. Henry Murr, I's program at Harvard, which included future Unabomber Ted Kaczynski among its subjects, specialized in breaking down the psychological defenses of highly intelligent students through systematic humiliation and intellectual assault. Students were told they would be participating in debates about their personal philosophies and life goals, but instead found themselves subjected to brutal psychological attacks designed to shatter their self-confidence and sense of identity. Trained interrogators would spend hours systematically demolishing every belief, value, and aspiration the students had expressed, using sophisticated psychological techniques to create maximum emotional trauma. After these sessions, students were left psychologically devastated, their fundamental sense of self destroyed. Researchers then stepped in as supportive figures, offering new frameworks for understanding themselves and the world. The students, desperate to rebuild their shattered identities, eagerly embraced whatever worldview their rescuers provided. This technique proved so effective that many subjects never recovered their original personalities, spending the rest of their lives unconsciously serving agendas that had been implanted during their most vulnerable moments. The corporate infiltration programs developed by MK Ultra researchers created a network of unwitting assets throughout American business and industry. Major corporations unknowingly hired employees who had been psychologically programmed to serve intelligence objectives while pursuing seemingly normal careers. These assets were activated through seemingly innocent communications, coded messages embedded in routine business correspondence, specific phrases spoken during casual conversations, or particular combinations of colors and symbols that triggered predetermined behavioral responses. The programmed employees would carry out their assignments while genuinely believing they were acting on their own initiative, making them immune to traditional counterintelligence detection methods. Some were programmed to steal specific types of information and transmit it through elaborate dead-drop systems they had memorized but couldn't consciously recall. Others were designed to influence corporate decisions in directions that served broader intelligence objectives. The most sophisticated assets were programmed with multiple personalities. Their normal work identity remained completely unaware of their intelligence functions, which operated through alternate psychological states that could be activated and deactivated as needed. These corporate assets provided intelligence agencies with unprecedented access to industrial secrets, financial information, and strategic business intelligence that shaped American economic policy for decades. Many of these programmed individuals are still active today, now in senior executive positions, continuing to unconsciously serve their original programming while believing they are simply successful business people following their natural instincts. The entertainment industry became one of MK Ultra's most successful infiltration targets, providing a perfect vehicle for mass psychological influence disguised as harmless entertainment. Researchers discovered that audiences in darkened theaters and living rooms watching television entered natural trance states that made them extremely susceptible to subliminal programming. Movies and television shows were embedded with specific visual patterns, audio frequencies, and narrative structures designed to trigger particular psychological responses in viewers. Actors and entertainers were recruited as unwitting assets through talent agencies and production companies that were secretly funded by CIA front organizations. These performers were subjected to intensive psychological conditioning that programmed them to deliver specific messages and promise out particular worldviews while believing they were simply expressing their artistic vision. The programming was so sophisticated that the entertainers would passionately defend ideas that had been implanted in their minds, making their advocacy completely authentic and therefore maximally persuasive to audiences. Entire generations of Americans had their values, beliefs, and behavioral patterns shaped by entertainment content that was carefully designed to serve intelligence objectives. The techniques developed in these programs became the foundation for modern media manipulation, advertising psychology, and political propaganda that continues to influence public opinion through seemingly innocent entertainment programming. The medical establishment's cooperation with MK Ultra revealed the complete corruption of institutions Americans trusted most for their safety and well-being. Hospitals across the country became recruitment centers for unwitting test subjects, with doctors and nurses identifying vulnerable patients who could be transferred to research programs without attracting attention. Prestigious medical schools received massive funding to conduct experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics, while maintaining their public reputations as centers of healing and scientific advancement. The researchers developed techniques so sophisticated that they could induce specific mental illnesses in healthy subjects, then test experimental treatments that served intelligence rather than therapeutic objectives. Patients seeking help for minor problems were deliberately misdiagnosed and subjected to radical procedures that destroyed their mental health while providing valuable data about psychological manipulation techniques. The medical records of these experiments were carefully falsified to hide the true nature of the research, creating a permanent cover-up that continues to this day. When congressional investigators finally uncovered these programs in the 1970s, they found that thousands of American citizens had been systematically tortured and psychologically destroyed by the very medical professionals they had trusted to help them. The techniques developed in these medical experiments became the foundation for modern psychiatric medication protocols, therapeutic procedures, and diagnostic criteria that continue to shape mental health care today. Comment below. Truth Seeker, twice. If you're ready to descend deeper into the forbidden knowledge that shapes your reality, this is your moment to claim your identity as someone who refuses to live in comfortable lies. The political infiltration programs developed by MKUltra created a shadow government of programmed assets operating at every level of American democracy. Politicians, judges, bureaucrats, and political activists were systematically identified, targeted, and psychologically conditioned to serve intelligence objectives while believing they were pursuing their own political convictions. The selection process focused on individuals with psychological vulnerabilities that made them susceptible to manipulation, personal traumas, financial pressures, sexual secrets, or ideological extremism that could be exploited through careful psychological conditioning. These political assets were programmed through seemingly innocent encounters, casual meetings at social events, therapeutic sessions disguised as stress management, or intensive political training programs that included covert psychological conditioning. The programming was designed to activate during specific political situations, causing the assets to take particular positions, support specific legislation, or oppose certain policies in ways that served broader intelligence objectives. The most sophisticated political assets were given multiple layers of programming that allowed them to function effectively in different political environments while always serving the same hidden masters. Congressional investigators later discovered that major political decisions affecting American foreign policy, domestic legislation, and judicial rulings had been influenced by politicians who were unconsciously following psychological programming rather than their stated political principles. The academic infiltration of MKUltra extended far beyond individual experiments to reshape entire fields of knowledge and scientific research. Universities received massive funding to develop new academic disciplines that served intelligence objectives while appearing to advance legitimate scholarship. Psychology departments were redirected to focus on behavioral modification rather than human understanding. Sociology programs were designed to study social control rather than social justice. Political science curricula were restructured to promote theories that justified elite control rather than democratic participation. The most insidious aspect of this academic infiltration was how it shaped the training of future professionals who would carry these perspectives into every sector of American society. Teachers, therapists, social workers, and policy analysts were educated using curricula that had been carefully designed to promote worldviews that served intelligence objectives. These professionals would spend their entire careers unconsciously implementing social control techniques while believing they were helping people or advancing knowledge. The academic research conducted under MKUltra funding became the foundation for modern theories in psychology, sociology, political science, and education that continue to shape American institutions today. Students graduating from these programs carried forward ideas and methods that had been developed for psychological warfare, applying them in schools, hospitals, government agencies, and private organizations throughout American society. The technological innovations developed through MK-Ultra research created the foundation for modern surveillance and behavioral control systems that now monitor every aspect of American life. Researchers discovered that human behavior could be precisely tracked, analyzed, and predicted using data collection techniques that seemed innocuous to the subjects being monitored. Early experiments involved monitoring subjects' physiological responses to different stimuli, mapping their emotional patterns, and identifying the specific triggers that could be used to manipulate their behavior. These techniques evolved into sophisticated surveillance systems that could monitor not just what people did, but how they felt, what they thought, and how they might behave in future situations. The data collected from these monitoring programs was used to develop algorithms that could predict and influence human behavior on a massive scale. The researchers realized that with sufficient data about individual psychological patterns, they could manipulate people's choices, emotions, and beliefs without the subjects ever realizing they were being controlled. These technological capabilities became the basis for modern advertising, political campaigning, and social media manipulation that now shapes public opinion and individual behavior through invisible psychological influence. The surveillance and control systems developed through MK-Ultra research have evolved into the comprehensive monitoring and manipulation infrastructure that governs American society today. The international expansion of MK-Ultra techniques created a global network of psychological warfare capabilities that transcended national boundaries and political systems. Intelligence agencies around the world collaborated on research programs that tested mind control techniques on diverse populations, sharing data and methods that enhanced their collective understanding of human psychological vulnerabilities. Foreign governments provided subjects for experiments that were too dangerous or ethically problematic to conduct on American soil, while American agencies shared technological innovations and training programs that expanded the global capacity for population control. The most sophisticated international programs involved the systematic targeting of foreign political leaders, cultural influencers, and social movements through psychological operations that could destabilize entire societies without obvious intervention. These programs proved that psychological warfare was more effective than traditional military action for achieving long-term political objectives. Enemy leaders could be driven to mental breakdown. Opposition movements could be internally fragmented through psychological manipulation, and entire populations could be gradually conditioned to accept political changes that served foreign interests. The international network established through MK-Ultra research became the foundation for modern global intelligence cooperation, creating a shadow system of psychological influence that operates across all national boundaries and political systems. The generational programming techniques developed in MK-Ultra's later phases created psychological control systems that could be transmitted from parents to children without conscious awareness. Researchers discovered that adults who had been subjected to mind control techniques would unconsciously replicate those same patterns when raising their own children, creating multi-generational cycles of psychological manipulation that appeared to be natural family dynamics. Parents who had been programmed with specific behavioral patterns, emotional responses, and belief systems would automatically condition their children to exhibit the same psychological characteristics. The children would grow up believing these patterns were normal family traits, never realizing they were carrying forward psychological programming that had been deliberately installed in their parents decades earlier. This generational transmission was so effective that entire family lines could be controlled through programming applied to a single generation, with the effects automatically propagating forward through normal child-rearing processes. The researchers had solved one of the most challenging problems in long-term social control: how to maintain psychological influence across multiple generations without requiring continuous direct intervention. These generational programming techniques became the foundation for creating self-perpetuating social control systems that could shape entire populations over decades and centuries through seemingly natural cultural transmission. The economic control systems developed through MK-Ultra research proved that financial institutions could be used as vehicles for mass psychological manipulation more effectively than any direct propaganda campaign. Researchers discovered that people's economic circumstances profoundly influence their psychological state, making them more or less susceptible to various forms of mental conditioning. By controlling access to employment, credit, housing, and basic necessities, intelligence agencies could create the precise psychological conditions needed to implement specific behavioral modifications in target populations. Economic stress made people desperate and therefore more willing to accept ideas and opportunities they would normally reject. Financial insecurity destroyed people's confidence in their own judgment, making them dependent on external authorities for guidance and direction. The researchers developed techniques for using economic manipulation to trigger specific psychological states in individuals and entire communities, then exploiting those states to implement desired behavioral changes. Banking systems, employment agencies, and financial institutions became unwitting partners in comprehensive social control programs that used economic pressure to achieve psychological objectives. These economic control techniques became the foundation for modern systems of social management that use financial incentives, employment requirements, and economic policies to shape public behavior and maintain social order. The spiritual manipulation programs revealed that human beings' deepest religious and philosophical beliefs could be systematically reprogrammed using techniques that appeared to provide genuine transcendent experiences. Researchers discovered that altered states of consciousness, whether induced by drugs, meditation, sensory deprivation, or psychological trauma, created windows of extreme suggestibility during which fundamental beliefs about reality could be completely restructured. Subjects experiencing these altered states would accept new spiritual frameworks with total conviction, believing they had received genuine divine revelations or achieved authentic enlightenment. The programming was so sophisticated that subjects would defend their new beliefs with religious fervor, making them immune to rational arguments or contradictory evidence. These techniques were tested in religious communities, spiritual movements, and New Age organizations that provided perfect cover for experimental programs disguised as legitimate spiritual practices. The researchers found they could create artificial religious experiences so convincing that subjects would dedicate their entire lives to serving the spiritual authorities who had provided these experiences. The spiritual manipulation techniques developed in these programs became the foundation for modern cult recruitment methods, religious radicalization programs, and spiritual movement infiltration that continues to influence American religious and philosophical communities today. The media manipulation infrastructure created through MK Ultra research established comprehensive systems for controlling public information and shaping collective consciousness through seemingly independent news and entertainment sources. Researchers discovered that public opinion could be effectively controlled through the careful management of information flow than through direct propaganda, because people were more likely to believe messages that appeared to come from multiple independent sources. Intelligence agencies established networks of journalists, editors, publishers, and media executives who would unconsciously promote specific narratives while believing they were exercising independent editorial judgment. These media assets were programmed through psychological conditioning techniques that made them genuinely passionate about promoting particular worldviews, ensuring their advocacy would be completely authentic and therefore maximally persuasive to audiences. The programming was so sophisticated that these media professionals would actively seek out information that confirmed their implanted beliefs while unconsciously avoiding or dismissing contradictory evidence. News stories, editorial positions, and entertainment content were coordinated across multiple media outlets to create the appearance of widespread consensus around positions that actually served intelligence objectives. This media manipulation infrastructure became the foundation for modern information control systems that shape public understanding of political, social, and economic issues through coordinated messaging across seemingly independent media platforms. The educational system infiltration programs transformed American schools into comprehensive behavior modification facilities that shaped children's psychological development according to intelligence agency specifications rather than educational objectives. Researchers discovered that children's natural curiosity and independent thinking could be systematically suppressed through educational techniques that rewarded compliance and punished questioning. School curricula were redesigned to promote specific worldviews, emotional responses, and behavioral patterns that would make students more susceptible to social control throughout their adult lives. Teachers were trained using psychological conditioning techniques disguised as educational methodology, programming them to implement behavior modification protocols while believing they were using advanced teaching methods. The most insidious aspect of this educational infiltration was how it targeted children's natural psychological development, redirecting their intellectual and emotional growth to serve social control objectives rather than individual fulfillment. Students were conditioned to seek approval from authority figures rather than developing independent judgment, to accept information without critical analysis, and to conform to social expectations rather than pursuing individual interests. These educational programming techniques created generations of adults who were psychologically predisposed to accept social control, making them ideal subjects for continued manipulation throughout their lives. The educational methods developed through MKUltra research became the foundation for modern school systems that continue to shape children's psychological development according to social management objectives. The pharmaceutical infiltration revealed how the medical treatment of mental health could be transformed into a comprehensive social control system that maintained psychological compliance throughout the population. Researchers discovered that psychiatric medications could be designed not just to treat symptoms, but to create specific psychological states that made patients more susceptible to external influence and control. The medications were carefully formulated to suppress critical thinking, reduce emotional intensity, and increase suggestibility while appearing to provide therapeutic benefits. Patients taking these medications became more compliant, less likely to question authority, and more willing to accept social conditions that they might otherwise resist. The pharmaceutical companies involved in this research developed marketing strategies that pathologized normal human emotional responses, creating artificial demand for medications that served social control rather than therapeutic objectives. Mental health professionals were trained to prescribe these medications for increasingly broad ranges of human behavior, expanding the population under pharmaceutical influence. The diagnostic criteria for mental illness were systematically expanded to include normal variations in human personality, emotion, and behavior, ensuring that larger portions of the population would be classified as needing pharmaceutical treatment. These pharmaceutical control techniques became the foundation for modern psychiatric medication protocols that maintain psychological compliance in millions of Americans who believe they are receiving legitimate medical treatment. The family structure manipulation programs targeted the fundamental relationships that provided psychological stability and social support, systematically weakening family bonds to make individuals more dependent on institutional authorities. Researchers discovered that people with strong family connections were more resistant to psychological manipulation because they had alternative sources of identity, values, and emotional support outside institutional control. Intelligence agencies developed comprehensive programs to undermine traditional family structures through cultural, economic, and legal interventions that appeared to serve other social objectives. Cultural programming promoted individualism over family loyalty. Economic policies made traditional family structures financially unsustainable, and legal systems were modified to reduce parental authority and family stability. These interventions were designed to create populations of isolated individuals who would be psychologically dependent on institutional authorities for guidance, support, and identity. Children were systematically separated from parental influence through educational systems, social services, and cultural programming that taught them to view institutional authorities as more trustworthy and knowledgeable than their own families. Adults were encouraged to prioritize career advancement, personal fulfillment, and social causes over family relationships, creating social conditions that naturally fragmented family bonds. The family manipulation techniques developed in these programs became the foundation for modern social policies and cultural trends that continue to weaken family structures and increase individual dependence on institutional control systems. The legal system infiltration created a comprehensive framework for using law enforcement and judicial processes as vehicles for psychological control and social management rather than justice and public safety. Researchers discovered that legal institutions possessed unique authority for modifying behavior and controlling populations through systematic application of rewards and punishments that could be precisely calibrated to achieve specific psychological objectives. Police departments were provided with training programs that taught officers to use psychological manipulation techniques during interactions with citizens, programming people to accept police authority through subtle conditioning rather than obvious coercion. Court systems were redesigned to function as behavior modification facilities where defendants were subjected to psychological pressure designed to break down their resistance and make them more compliant with social expectations. Legal procedures were modified to include psychological evaluation and treatment requirements that gave mental health professionals extensive control over citizens' lives under the guise of rehabilitation and public safety. The most sophisticated legal control programs involved the systematic targeting of specific populations through selective enforcement, discriminatory sentencing, and rehabilitation programs that served social control rather than justice objectives. These legal manipulation techniques became the foundation for modern criminal justice policies that use psychological conditioning and behavior modification to maintain social order through comprehensive population management rather than traditional law enforcement. The technological surveillance systems developed through MKUltra research created unprecedented capabilities for monitoring and manipulating human behavior through digital platforms that appeared to provide convenience and entertainment rather than control and surveillance. Researchers discovered that people would voluntarily provide detailed information about their thoughts, emotions, relationships, and activities if the data collection was embedded in technologies that provided apparent benefits to users. Social media platforms, search engines, and mobile applications were designed to gather comprehensive psychological profiles of users while providing services that made the surveillance feel beneficial rather than intrusive. The data collected through these platforms was analyzed using algorithms developed from MKUltra research to identify individual psychological vulnerabilities and predict behavioral responses to different forms of manipulation. Users could then be subjected to precisely targeted psychological influence campaigns disguised as personalized content, advertisements, and social interactions. The technological surveillance infrastructure became so sophisticated that it could monitor not just what people did online, but their emotional states, relationship patterns, political opinions, and susceptibility to different forms of influence. These technological control systems created the capability for real-time psychological manipulation of entire populations through digital platforms that people used voluntarily and enthusiastically, believing they were simply enjoying modern conveniences rather than submitting to comprehensive behavioral control. The international intelligence cooperation established through MKUltra research created a global shadow system of psychological warfare capabilities that transcended national sovereignty and democratic accountability. Intelligence agencies from allied nations shared research data, experimental techniques, and operational methods that enhanced their collective ability to manipulate populations and control political developments worldwide. This international cooperation allowed agencies to conduct experiments and operations in each other's territories, circumventing legal restrictions and oversight mechanisms designed to protect citizens from government abuse. Foreign populations became testing grounds for psychological warfare techniques that were too dangerous or controversial to deploy domestically, while domestic populations were subjected to influence operations conducted by foreign agencies operating under intelligence sharing agreements. The Global Intelligence Network established comprehensive systems for identifying, targeting, and manipulating political leaders, cultural influencers, and social movements in any country, creating the capability for invisible political intervention that could destabilize governments or influence policy decisions without obvious foreign interference. These international psychological warfare capabilities became the foundation for modern global intelligence operations that use social media, cultural influence, and economic pressure to achieve political objectives through invisible manipulation rather than traditional diplomatic or military intervention. The corporate integration programs revealed how private businesses could be transformed into extensions of intelligence operations while maintaining their commercial functions and public legitimacy. Major corpo rations were provided with psychological research, technological capabilities, and operational methods developed through MK Ultra programs, enabling them to implement comprehensive employee and customer manipulation systems disguised as business innovation and customer service. Human resources departments were trained to use psychological conditioning techniques for employee management, creating workplace environments that suppressed independent thinking and promoted behavioral compliance through sophisticated reward and punishment systems. Marketing departments received advanced psychological manipulation techniques that could influence consumer behavior at subconscious levels, making people purchase products and services they didn't actually want or need. Customer service operations were designed to gather detailed psychological profiles of consumers while appearing to provide helpful support, creating comprehensive databases of individual vulnerabilities that could be exploited for commercial or political purposes. The most sophisticated corporate integration programs involved the systematic placement of intelligence assets in executive positions throughout major industries, ensuring that business decisions would serve intelligence objectives while appearing to pursue normal commercial interests. These corporate control techniques became the foundation for modern business practices that use psychological manipulation for employee management, customer relations, and market influence, creating a comprehensive system of commercial social control. The cultural programming initiatives demonstrated how entertainment, art, and social movements could be systematically manipulated to reshape collective consciousness and social values according to intelligence agency specifications. Researchers discovered that cultural influence was more effective than political propaganda for achieving long-term social change because people were less likely to recognize and resist cultural manipulation than obvious political messaging. Intelligence agencies established comprehensive networks within entertainment industries, artistic communities, and social movements that could promote specific cultural narratives while appearing to represent authentic creative expression or grassroots social change. Artists, musicians, writers, and activists were recruited as unwitting assets through funding programs, career opportunities, and social connections that gradually influenced their creative output and political activism. The cultural programming was so sophisticated that these cultural influencers would passionately promote ideas and values that had been strategically designed to serve intelligence objectives while believing they were expressing their authentic artistic vision or social conscience. Social movements were infiltrated and redirected to channel popular dissatisfaction into activities that actually strengthened existing power structures rather than challenging them. These cultural manipulation techniques became the foundation for modern entertainment industries, artistic institutions, and social movements that continue to shape American values and social development according to elite social control objectives rather than authentic cultural evolution. The ultimate revelation of MK Ultra's legacy is not just what was done to unwitting subjects in secret laboratories, but how completely these techniques have been integrated into the normal functioning of American society. Every institution you interact with, schools, hospitals, workplaces, media organizations, government agencies, now operates using psychological manipulation methods that were perfected through decades of illegal human experimentation. The techniques that once required specialized facilities and trained operatives are now embedded in standard procedures that shape your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors every single day. Your education programmed you to seek approval from authority figures rather than developing independent judgment. Your workplace uses psychological conditioning to ensure compliance and productivity. Your entertainment shapes your values and worldview through carefully crafted narratives. Your social media feeds are precisely calibrated to trigger specific emotional responses and behavioral patterns. Even your medical treatment may involve psychiatric medications designed to maintain psychological compliance rather than genuine healing. The most terrifying aspect of this revelation is that the vast majority of people implementing these control systems have no idea they're participating in comprehensive social manipulation. They genuinely believe they're helping, educating, entertaining, or serving the public interest. You now possess dangerous knowledge that most people will refuse to accept because acknowledging this reality would require completely reconstructing their understanding of the society they live in. The question you must answer is simple but profound. Now that you know the truth about how your reality has been systematically constructed to control you, what are you going to do about it?